The Good Samaritan gets a lot of airplay, and maybe it's because he broke that pattern.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you haven't recognized this picture of this movie?
I do not recognize the movie. I see the title of it, though. I mean, at least part of it. Earthspin movie.
That's right. Back in 1990, the Galileo probe. The Galileo probe is gone. The Galileo probe was launched in like 1987. This scene was put together from a series of pictures as it was approaching Earth. Some interesting things. This is the first flyby of Earth from one of our probes. You can see the big reflection in the ocean of the sun. You can see the clouds twist a little bit here and there. When I spent like 2.5 hours in 1990 to download this son of a bitch, and by the way, it was nowhere near this good of resolution. This was the coolest thing I'd ever seen in the computer until that time. This is the first view of the Earth that we got at all from space of the South Pole.
Wow.
Most of our satellites don't really go around the South. Some of the Russians did, but the Americans didn't. So this is like our first good view of the South Pole from space.
Very cool. Yeah.
You know I'm throwing up this picture of Earth just to show off.
Why is that?
Because environmental issues also often get an SEP field.
I was going to bring that up when we brought up the environment, of how breaking the pattern and the psychological environment component when someone needs help is by shrinking the environment down to one. How does that apply in the environment outside of people and inside of the climate and the world, Earth?
Well, for starters, what's the major symbol of the environmental movement?
You've got the green energy, you've got the recycle symbol, you got
the color green, we got the recycling is one particular thing, but what's the symbol for
Earth?
The environment? It's the Earth.
Yeah.
This is the symbol for the environment.
Yeah.
By shrinking the Earth down into something that's like the size of our hands, we can sort of get a sense of how fragile it might really be.
Yeah, for sure.
If we can send spaceships out into the solar system and land on their planets, maybe we can do something on our planet. Yeah. I don't want to get preachy about the environment because I freaking hate that. But the fact is, those kinds of systematic things, like the environment, like for example, if there's an asteroid coming in, you and I don't have any power to do anything about an asteroid. That's definitely somebody else's problem kind of situation.
Well, here is where the two intersection points come out. When I at least, this is just off the cuff here a little bit, but how does SEP feel breaking the patterns, the bad patterns in a psychological environment? How can that have a macro impact on the non-psychological, but actually the material, physical environment around us? In other words, how can breaking certain patterns, negative patterns in handling of situations between people, and so like instead of having the regular be massive people ignore this person hurting, the regular is massive people helping other people. How does that play a role for long-term actual environmental health when you have, because there has to be some kind of intersection there, right? If you have a better, more cohesive psychological environment, you have to think that applies on a non-psychological physical world as well, because just the cohesiveness exists there, right? Or is that just too much fluff talk?
Well, I use the environment as the first example of the kind of thing that might be like a systematic situation. But there's let me use one.
Sorry.
It's gonna sound weird. When we talk about
oh shit.
What?
Okay, I'm still here. Sorry, my computer's about to die, and I almost messed up my router, but it looks like it's still alive, and I'm not going to touch anything else. Sorry about that. All right, let's get back at it.
And hold on, I'm getting people. Manny says sheep looking for a leader, or what about people who don't need a leader and they're looking for one anyway? Buckminster Fuller talked about some of the ways to deal with this, and I want to describe one that I have some experience with.
Yeah, I do like that sheep looking for a leader line, and I do agree with you too. I think everyone. So, like, I think a lot of people can be both the leader and the sheep, but for some reason, it seems like many sheep don't want to step into a leader type of a role. It seems like those two things can be one and the same, but it's just a perspective shift at times, a choice almost.
Well, let me describe something, and let me put your picture over here, or it will get in the way because now I got something there. Let me just, so these systematic issues, these are the ones that get away from us. Like, for example, pollution, like that big giant pile of plastic in the Pacific.
Right.
Whose problem is that? Well, I mean, according to like high seas law, it's nobody's problem.
Right.
Same, just like the pirates off Somalia. Like the pirates who are out 300 miles off the coast where there's no international law, they basically run the ocean if they want to. Who's dealing with that? Well, nobody's dealing with that. That's an example of the kind of things, real life situations that we have going on in.
And I would say, where does the perspective of solution come into problem? When you say, oh, that's somebody else's problem, does that also from the field perspective, negate the reality of who is responsible for the solution? Because just because it's someone else's problem doesn't mean it's not a solution you should or could handle. Does that make sense?
Well, let me describe something that I'm familiar with, and as soon as I start going into it, you're like, oh yeah, I know this. And it's called the first worst problem. You ever heard of that?
The first worst problem. I've not heard of that.
First worst. What the hell? Why is that so big? First worst. What it means is that the standard that gets around to the market ends up owning the market.
Standard gets to the market. Gotcha. Yeah.
All right. So the classic one is VHS versus beta. You familiar with that at all?
VHS versus what?
Versus beta.
I'm familiar with VHS.
All right. So VHS versus beta refers to and this is old school, but it doesn't matter. You get the idea. VHS was the old school videotapes.
Yeah, for sure.
Beta was the early competitor.
Gotcha.
And what happened is that both of these came out, and beta was better quality, better play time, and it was a little more expensive.
Sounds similar to the Blu-ray versus HD DVD situation from a couple of years back.
This is always an issue. VHS had the money. They were cheap enough, right? They were the cheap one. But VHS had the market share.
Yeah.
And that's why they ended up dominating the field. Now, this is an example of a systematic issue that nobody's in charge of, that maybe is the kind of problem that we could do something about when we see these standards starting to show up. And we can apply it to lots of things. Who are some of your, think of any technology, a phone or an app or anything, and maybe we can look at, maybe we should go look at some comments and see if anybody can think of some examples of those.
So I guess my question is, so market share won out despite the fact that the quality was better with beta. What's to say that because the lower quality got greater market share, there wasn't some kind of a long-term beneficial factor that goes unseen from that? In other words, was VHS able to do anything superior over time that maybe an entity like Beta, who started with the more premium product, wouldn't have thought to do? Is that possible?
Another one I know about is PS2 versus ISA. These are actually the plugs inside of computers. Gotcha. And we see the exact same thing again. The PS2 was a that's a bad example. we might talk about Apple versus IBM. Are you familiar with the differences? Have you ever used an Apple machine?
Yeah, I like Apple Mac products.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Because for a long time, Apple was absolutely the superior product in terms of speed, in terms of video quality, in terms of available memory.
Yep. I do remember when period of time for the home computer when I was growing up, IBM was perceived mid 90s. It probably was to be, or maybe it was Macintosh, whatever, to be either equal or better for the desktop. And then Apple just came back and killed it.
Now there are political systems, and we might even talk about those kinds of systemic effects.
Yeah, those would be a lot of fun to talk about. in terms of the SEP breakdown that happens frequently.
When people talk about judging political systems,
yeah,
how often does a political system get installed because it's a first course? People talk about Facebook. Does Facebook really have all the things we really want to see in a social, social media platform? Or is it just that they're so big that nobody ever wants to move away from it?
And there seems to be a part that's missing there because, it comes in first, it gets market share, but then it seems to have some kind of a grab of some kind to almost stunt its own growth, if that makes sense. So like Kodak is a perfect example of this. So Kodak held on to the digital photo technology because they thought it would cannibalize their market share for film. So they had the patent for a decade. They did not bring it to market. They let it expire, and then Canon just came and mushroom stamped the hell out of them. And the reason was because they were under the presumption that they were going to cannibalize their market. But what they didn't realize was that it was only a matter of time that something better gets there. And by trying to, back to the Catholic call from earlier, trying to preserve it did not help them in the long run, because ultimately what's going to happen is if you don't try to pursue the next best thing, someone else will. Is that a fair way to put it? Maybe, I don't know.
Well, maybe. And that's the thing, when you talk about the implementation of standards and the development of technology, nobody can really predict that.
Yeah.
That's kind of the reason I want to talk about this stuff, because these kinds of questions about hiding information, breaking through the hiding information, systematic issues that sort of get away from me, they're fascinating because they're all open to it. You ever heard of Dvorak, the Dvorak keyboard?
Have I ever heard of what? Dvorak? Is that what it is?
Dvorak.
There you go. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me? There you go. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can. Sorry, I couldn't hear you for a second. I've not heard of Dvorak.
Dvorak. Spencer's actually learning the Dvorak keyboard. Dvorak was an early time motion study guy, along with Galbraith, if you know that guy.
Yeah.
Galbraith invented the Thurblig, which is basically his name reversed, to do like complicated studies of factories. In fact, I'll show you. Let me share this real quick. So this guy Galbraith, who started doing these time motion studies to decide what is better in a factory, he decided that this move is like the minimal move in workstation.
Yeah.
And he would calculate all the other moves that people did as units of Thurblig. Yeah, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. What?
But yeah, these early time motion guys include Dvorak, he ran a typing pool. Dvorak ran a group of ladies back in the 30s